The second part of this task is going to be labeling sentences. So we're going to go through and do several examples together, and then you're going to complete this on your own, trying it. So the directions tell us to start by boxing the subordinating conjunction to find the dependent clause. And then when we find that dependent clause, we underline it. And then label the subject and the verb in the dependent clause as well as the independent clause. The other thing I'm going to suggest is that you get rid of phrases first, because that's going to help you eliminate some of these confusing conjunctions that also work as prepositions. So if you look at our example sentence, and I want you to trace it along with me just so you can see what I'm doing, it says, as long as she's given the option, Kelly will choose chips over candy. Now, one hint to us here is that there's a comma, and that tells me that I might have my dependent clause at the beginning. So I'm going to look at the beginning to see, is there a word at the beginning of the sentence that's somewhere on this list? And there is. As long as, so I'm going to box it, and if as long as is the subordinating conjunction, I'm going to think as long as what? As long as she's given the option. In that clause, she is the subject and is given is the verb. So that is a dependent clause. On the other side, we cover that up. We're left with Kelly will choose chips over candy. Oh, and I saw a prepositional phrase that I forgot to get rid of here. Over candy. So I'm left with Kelly will choose chips. Kelly is the subject. Will choose is the verb. So that's an independent clause. And we know a dependent clause plus an independent clause equals a complex sentence. For the next one, I'm going to tell you that there are 3 dependent clauses in here. It says, while I know that dinosaurs are extinct, I'm not so sure about Bigfoot. So I see a prepositional phrase, I'm going to get rid of it, about Bigfoot. And then I'm going to look to see, do I see any words in my list in this sentence? Again, I see a comma, so I'm going to start at the beginning. And I see down here the word while. So while is a subordinating conjunction. Now I'm going to think, while what? What is it talking about that's happening while? While I know, I is the subject, and what do? I know. So that is a dependent clause. You'll notice it doesn't go all the way to the comma, because I see another word in there, that is a subordinating conjunction. So if that is a subordinating conjunction, that what? That dinosaurs are extinct. In that clause, dinosaurs is the subject and are is the verb. So I have a dependent clause with another dependent clause. That means I've got to have an independent clause to make a sentence. I'm not so sure. I am the subject, and it's connected in a contraction, I am. So that together is my subject and verb. So that's my independent clause. And a dependent clause plus an independent clause is a complex sentence. Now, I would suggest that you pause the screencast right now and then go see if you can figure this one out on your own. Start by getting rid of phrases, and then look on this list and see, do you see a word or group of words that acts like a subordinating conjunction? And I'll tell you that there is one here. So pause the screencast and then try it. All right, so I'm going to start with my prepositional phrases. Of medical research and on cancer. So when I get rid of those, I'm left with lots is being done so that we may find a cure. Now I don't see a comma in here, so that means I've got to look towards the second part of the sentence to look for my subordinating conjunction. And I see that, but I also see it with the word so, and that's one we probably need to pay special attention to. So by itself is a conjunction, but when it's with that, they work together to make a subordinating conjunction. So that what? So that we may find a cure. And within that dependent clause, the subject here is we. And what are we doing? We may find. So that's a dependent clause. Let's look over here with what was left to find our independent clause. Lots is being done. Lots is the subject, and then this whole thing acts like our verb is being done. So that's an independent clause. An independent clause plus a dependent clause is a complex sentence. So I'm going to say, try this again. You're going to pause the screencast, go look for the phrases, and then look for a subordinating conjunction, a word on this list somewhere in this sentence, and then start the screencast again so you can check your work. So I see an infinitive. I'm going to get rid of that. To leave. And now I'm going to look to see if I see a subordinating conjunction, and I do. I see until. Now, until could be a preposition if it's followed by a noun. If I thought that until she was a prepositional phrase, and I took it out, the rest of that sentence isn't going to make any sense. Remember, when we take prepositional phrases out, the sentence still sounds okay. So, this has to be being used as a subordinating conjunction. Until what? Until she has taken the tour. So within that clause, she is the subject. And what did she do? She has taken. So there's my dependent clause. Let's go look at what's left. Jazzy doesn't want. Well, Jazzy is the subject. And these two work together. Does want or doesn't want acts like my independent clause. And an independent clause with a dependent clause is a complex sentence. Although Terry likes a good game of cards, his friend prefers board games. So pause the screencast, go try it on your own. And I see a prepositional phrase here. Get rid of that, ignore it. I see a comma, so that makes me think I could look to the beginning of my sentence for a subordinating conjunction. And way up here, I see although. So although is my subordinating conjunction. And I might ask myself, although what? Although Terry likes a good game of cards, all the way up to that comma. Within that clause, if it's a subordinating conjunction, there has to be a subject and a verb after it. So Terry is my subject. And what is it saying about Terry? Terry likes. So that's a dependent clause. Then there has to be an independent clause. Let's look at what's left. His friend prefers board games. Who is the sentence about? His friend. And what does his friend do? His friend prefers. So that's an independent clause. And a dependent clause with an independent clause equals a complex sentence. We're going to do two more together, and then you're going to do the back of the page on your own, or the second page on your own. Whenever Dad and I go to the rifle range, we exercise extreme caution. So I would pause the screencast, go try it on your own, and then come back to check your work. So I see a prepositional phrase, to the rifle range. Get rid of that. I see a comma, so that's my hint to see is there a subordinating conjunction at the beginning? And there is, whenever. So put a box around whenever. Whenever what? Whenever Dad and I go to the rifle range. If that's really a dependent clause, then I have to have a subject and a verb in there. And I actually see two subjects and verbs. It's about Dad and I. And what do? We go. So that's a dependent clause. If there's a dependent clause, there has to be an independent clause. We exercise extreme caution. What's the subject? We. And what do? We exercise. So that's an independent clause. And a dependent clause with an independent clause equals a complex sentence. A safe habitat has been mandated for the fringe-toed lizard so that it won't become extinct. I see two phrases, or I see one phrase in here, sorry. For the fringe-toed lizard. So it's a safe habitat has been mandated so that it won't become extinct. I don't see a comma in here, so that means I need to look in the second part of the sentence to see if I see a subordinating conjunction. And I see that, but I see it with so. So I'm going to group those together, so that. And that tells me where the dependent clause starts, so that it won't become extinct. Within that clause, there has to be a subject, it. and the verb that works together won't become. So that's a dependent clause. So it's got to have an independent clause. A safe habitat has been mandated. The subject here is habitat, and the verb phrase is has been mandated. All works together. So an independent clause with a dependent clause equals a complex sentence. Now I know this seems redundant because all of these obviously are complex sentences, but what we're looking at is patterns and figuring out and starting to recognize how those patterns work, because this is a new sentence type. So you're going to do the practice on the second part. And I'm going to go through and tell you how many of each phrases and how many clauses there are to look for. So there's one phrase. I'll do it this way. One phrase and one clause. So one phrase and one clause in this sentence. This one has two phrases and one clause, which means you're going to have one subordinating conjunction here. I should say one dependent clause. The pelican scooped up a tasty fish while it struggled furiously to escape its predator. There is one phrase, although it looks like you might think that there are two, but there's only one. And, oh, I'm sorry. We'll go with two. Scratch that. And one clause. Bill got there early this morning so that he'd be there first to purchase a season pass. I see one phrase and one clause. Although the foster grandparent program is more than 30 years old, people do not know about it. There is one phrase and one clause. This program was established so that hospitalized and institutionalized children could get special attention. No phrases, but one clause. Anyone can volunteer who is at least 60 years old and meets other requirements. There is one phrase and one clause. And I'm going to tell you that the clause is in the middle for this one. So the clause is in the middle. So be careful. After a volunteer is trained, he or she is assigned to children. No phrases, but one clause. Because foster grandparents need to get to know their grandchildren, they visit the children each day. This has two phrases and one clause. These daily visits last for 2 hours so that the children can get careful attention from their foster grandparents. That has two phrases, one clause. Although foster grandparents are volunteers, they are paid. No phrases, one clause. And the last one, they also receive special travel expenses while they serve. No phrases, one clause. Now when you are done with this, you're going to go back to our tracking chart and you're going to click Exit Ticket, and it's going to take you to a form that you're going to fill out. So you're going to put your name on there, your class. You can use your notes to do any of these, but it's going to ask you to refer to question number 6. So go look at question number 6 on your paper. Number 7, number 8, number 12, and so on. And just something to note, some of these were, the second page of these, the numbers got run off there. So this was 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and so on. 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18. Okay, good luck. You need to make sure you get a 75% on that, or you're going to redo this task. So take your time.